Hello, my name is Russ Ernst, Product Manager for Lumension Patch and Remediation, and today I'm going to walk you through a demonstration in detail for Lumension Patch and Remediation as a module of the Lumension Endpoint Management and Security Suite. In today's rapidly changing IT environment, keeping control of your endpoint operations and IT security is a difficult task. Here are some of the challenges that businesses face today. IT environments have become more complex due to the growth of virtual networks and the increasing number of remote endpoints. They can't be managed effectively. Security threats are no longer just limited to Microsoft platforms, and other applications and platforms such as Apple, Oracle, Linux, Unix, and Sun Solaris are also at risk. Traditional point-based technologies and solutions have added more complexity and cost to organizations because IT teams are focusing on the integration of different technologies and have to use many different consoles across multiple products. As a result, organizations are usually required to operate multiple agents that perform related tasks. In addition, due to the economy, IT organizations have fewer IT resources that manage endpoint operations and security. Finally, IT operations and IT security are not known to always cooperate effectively, which could significantly impact your organizational compliance and increase your IT security risk. As the number of new vulnerabilities remains stable after an explosive growth through 2006, and as the window of time between vulnerabilities discovered and exploits launched continues to shrink, the biggest challenge for many organizations is deploying patches before an exploit occurs. Rapid vulnerability management is critical to keeping up with the latest threats. Gartner predicts a convergence of security and IT operations. According to Gartner, IT security and operations must converge because security professionals need operations expertise, and IT operations needs better tools to keep up with fast-growing unique malware threats. Gartner claims that the benefits of this convergence will be a reduced total cost of ownership, or TCO, better integration between security and operations teams, faster time to security, better reporting and auditing, and other future protection scenarios. So what is really needed is a solution that operationalizes security, compliance, and IT risk management with the lowest total cost of ownership possible. This is no longer just a Microsoft world. Many of the platform and OS vulnerabilities are beyond just Microsoft Windows. We've seen a large increase in vulnerabilities across both Apple Mac platforms as well as Linux platforms, two of the top 3 highest percentage of all reported operating system vulnerabilities. And many of the vulnerabilities are also in third-party applications. In order to fully patch your endpoints, it's estimated you may need upwards of 12 different patching tools to patch all the different third-party applications. Broad third-party application support is critical in order to maintain a complete vulnerability compliance. It's also important to track and report across vulnerabilities across Windows and Mac machines in the same console. Your environment also has all sorts of risk added every day and in different ways. Software and OS lifecycle assumes new bugs, design flaws will be discovered as technology is adopted and deployed. On average, 15 new vulnerabilities are released every day, and over 90% of vulnerabilities can be exploited remotely. Software vulnerabilities grow daily. Understanding these risks is critical in your ability to address risk efficiently. Lumension Patch and Remediation is the world's leading patch management solution and is available as a modular offering on Lumension Endpoint Management and Security Suite. With Lumension Patch and Remediation, IT administrators can automatically identify and patch vulnerabilities across heterogeneous operating systems, Microsoft and non-Microsoft applications, and endpoint configurations, all of which is seamlessly managed through a single console. Lumension Patch and Remediation provides asset discovery and inventory, heterogeneous environment support, and extensive third-party application coverage. Our patch management solution not only improves security and streamlines endpoint operations, it reduces complexity, optimizes total cost of ownership, and improves visibility and delivers control back to your IT infrastructure. So right before we get into the demonstration here today, I want to talk about the 5 different steps in the patch and remediation workflow. First, we'll talk about how to discover, that's both discovering assets and integrating them within your console, then to assess those endpoints and for the vulnerability risk on those endpoints, to prioritize the vulnerabilities in your environment, remediate those vulnerabilities, and then report back. So with that, let's move into our first step. In today's diverse IT environments, devices are added and removed every day. Do you really know what devices are connected to your network, and are you able to manage them effectively? Our integrated discovery feature in Lumension Patch Remediation helps you gain full network visibility into all of your managed and unmanaged endpoints, and this includes both physical and virtual systems. So today what we're going to talk about is, in the Lumension Patch Remediation solution, first, discovering assets on your network. Now this is the overall integrated console, and so we're going to move over to the Discover dropdown and look at the assets. In the Discover dropdown, we have the ability to scan for new assets, actually scan for assets and install agents, or look at your assets and uninstall any agents on those. So for today, what we want to look at is setting up a discovery scan. By selecting assets from the Discovery dropdown, we're able to start the Discover Assets wizard. This gives us options for setting up a discovery job within the environment. And you can set this as an immediate job, or set it to be a one-time job, or set it up for a recurring scan on a weekly or monthly basis. We want to set this for an immediate scan. We can also have this discovery look for a single IP address, so if you know exactly where that machine is you're looking to target, or you can set it for an IP range, a specific computer name, an entire network neighborhood, through an AD integration, or to import a file list. So for now we're going to look at just for a specific computer name. I'm looking for something that's just says XP in the title. I now have a number of different discovery options, and clicking next past this, I can provide my user credentials to access this machine. And then I'll finish this job, and this will take me over to my Active Discovery Scan Job menu. From this menu, you can see that here are the different scheduled jobs that I have set up, the different active jobs. Now you can see that that job is completed, so there are no more active jobs. And so then I can go to the Completed tab, and this will show me this new completed job that I've just finished. And from here I can drill into this job to see if there were any results that were found. In this case, no targets were found in this IP network for that discovery name, but this is how you would discover assets on your network. All right, so we've discovered our assets on the network that we want to manage with patch and remediation. Next, we want to assess the vulnerabilities on those endpoints. So I'm going to go from here, I'm actually going to manage endpoints in this environment. And you can see that I have a consolidated view of all the different modules that are under management on my Lumension Endpoint Management Security Suite, as well as all the different endpoints that are currently being managed. So for here, what I want to do is take a look at this Patch and Remediation tab. And I get a consolidated view all at once of all the different endpoints that currently have the Patch and Remediation module assigned to these endpoints. I can now also look at each of these individual machines to start to look at the vulnerabilities that are applicable to these machines. So I'm going to drill into this Windows 7 machine here. I now have a more detailed view of this specific endpoint, where I have a number of different information tabs available to me. Specifically right now, though, what I'm interested in is beyond just the general information, which will show you some of the specific information about this endpoint. And you can see here that this endpoint is currently online and has completed Discover applicable updates recently. But as I start to assess the vulnerability status of this endpoint, I want to look at the Vulnerabilities tab itself. This is where I'm getting a more detailed view of all of the specific vulnerabilities that are currently applicable to this endpoint. Now within this view, I can see all the different vulnerabilities for both Microsoft operating system vulnerabilities, as well as some of the third-party application vulnerabilities that are applicable to this endpoint. Now, if I wanted to see a more general view of the vulnerability status of my environment, I can also look by groups. So I'm going to select the Groups option from the Manage dropdown. Within this Groups menu, I have the ability to see both custom groups and system groups, as well as some of the imported directory services groups from my last AD synchronization. For today, though, what I want to look at is the vulnerability status for this vulnerability management custom group that I've set up previously. Within this view, I can see, again, just the number of endpoints that are assigned to this group, but from this view dropdown, I want to look specifically at the vulnerabilities that are applicable to this group. Now, within some of the filtering options that are available at the top of the menu, I can view for all the different content that's available, only critical content, new critical content, or some of the superseded content. I also have some of the ability to see some of the different content types, including software installers or policy type content. But for right now, since we're looking at the vulnerability assessments, I only want to look at the critical content for these machines. I also have the ability to look for whether they're applicable, which of this content is enabled or disabled, and then whether that content is patched or not patched for those endpoints. So these views give me the ability to look at all the different endpoints that are connected to the network, and it also allows me to assess all the different operating system, application, and security configuration vulnerabilities that exist on these managed endpoints. This allows you to assess your organization's security risk and then proactively identify and prioritize those known issues before they can be exploited. All right, so we've discovered the endpoints that we want to manage. Now we've assessed some of the vulnerabilities that are on those endpoints. Now it's time to prioritize the vulnerabilities in preparation for deployment out to those endpoints. Now that you know the vulnerabilities in your network, you need to take the proper steps to remediate them. But do you really know which vulnerabilities you should eliminate first? Many organizations feel overwhelmed by their findings and need some way to prioritize those patches for the deployments. Prioritizing threats and mitigation actions will help you increase the organization's security posture, but not interrupt critical business operations. In this step, you want to be able to review the types of vulnerabilities, software updates, and misconfigurations on your endpoints by vulnerability or device groups. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to go back into the Manage Endpoints page and take a look at some of the different sorting options that you can use to prioritize those vulnerabilities in your environment. So this is, again, a consolidated look of all the different endpoints that are under management. We can take a look at just the Patch and Remediation tab to start to do this first pass. And then from here, if you wanted to manage vulnerabilities by a specific endpoint, drill into that endpoint. We've already looked at this Windows 7 machine, so let's take a look at that again. And again, from this tab, I'm able to look at the different vulnerabilities that are applicable to this endpoint. At this point, you could use all the different sorting views at the top and filters to limit the number of vulnerabilities that are applicable to this in this view to start to prioritize which ones need to be sent out first. In this view, you could filter by a specific name or a specific CVE ID. So if you're actually looking to remediate a specific CVE that you know about that may exist in your network, you can search for that specific CVE ID to see which vulnerabilities are applicable to that. But also you could sort by looking at only critical content or by other types of content such as software installers or policy content. For now, we only want to look at critical content that's been released in the last 30 days. You also have the ability to filter based off applicability and whether that content is enabled or disabled and whether it's currently patched or not patched. So if I update the view here, it's going to really limit the amount of deployments that I would want to target for this endpoint. You also may want to look at beyond just a single endpoint and look at the group's vulnerabilities. As we showed a few moments ago in the Vulnerability Management Custom Group, I now have the ability to look at all the different vulnerabilities that are applicable to all the machines that are in this custom group. When we talk about patch management best practices, it's important that you set up some custom groups for your different content test groups so you can prioritize the rollout of this remediation content to your test groups first before doing a complete rollout of vulnerabilities to your entire environment. In this case, for this vulnerability management group, I can take a look at the specific endpoints that I have managed here. So I know exactly which machines are going to be affected by these deployments. If I look specifically from a patch and remediation standpoint, I can see here under the patch and remediation tab that all these endpoints are currently online and ready to accept a deployment. This endpoint is currently in an idle status, and so that endpoint could take a deployment at any time. From the groups view, I can also look at the different vulnerabilities that are available to these endpoints. And again, I'd like to use my filtering options to start looking at only the critical content that's been released in the last 30 days. I only want to view the content that's applicable, and then only the enabled and not patched content. So again, this limits the amount of content that's visible or currently applicable to those machines, and allows me to more effectively stage these deployments to these endpoints. So I'm looking at all the critical content, and this is showing me both some XP and some Windows 7 operating system patches. I have a mix of XP and Windows 7 machines. Some cumulative updates for Internet Explorer on those machines. I also have Firefoxes on some of those machines, so I have a Firefox update and then some Adobe updates. So this more effectively allows me to prioritize the deployment of this content to these impacted machines. So we've discovered the endpoints we want to manage. We've assessed the vulnerabilities that are on those endpoints. We've started to prioritize the deployments for those endpoints. Now we actually want to take the step and remediate the vulnerabilities on those endpoints. Once the identification and analysis is complete, you may discover a sizable number of known vulnerabilities that could afford cybercriminals a means to penetrate your environment. How do you effectively remediate all of these threats in order to dramatically improve your risk posture and avoid costly, embarrassing attacks? Get ready to deploy patches to all affected endpoints. You'll want to prioritize your remediations by groups, business impact, and level of importance of the patches. Use LEMSS to deploy the latest Patch Tuesday security releases. So in this portion, we're actually going to take this groups view that we looked at previously and start to run a deployment of the vulnerabilities that are on those endpoints. In this view, I can take a look at actually and drill into these individual vulnerabilities to see which ones need to be remediated straight away. I've already determined that I want to send a deployment of all these vulnerabilities. These are the most critical, most recently released vulnerabilities that are applicable to these target endpoints. So I just want to create a deployment for all these vulnerabilities to these endpoints. What I'm going to do is select all the vulnerabilities, or I could select these individually, but in this case I do want to select all of them. And then I want to select this option to deploy that content. I can either select the deploy button from the top, or we've enabled right-clicking from this web console. So this will start the deployment wizard itself. And this is a step-by-step process for deploying the content to these target machines. The first step here is I'm going to review which endpoints are impacted or the types of OSs that are impacted in this deployment. And I know that this is a mix of XP machines and Windows 7 machines. So I'm taking a look at just these two OSs, but I also could extend this search for additional endpoints if I wanted to. The next step is then to review the packages that are included in these deployments. So I can see that I've got 2 Adobe packages that are available. I also have a number of Microsoft and a single Mozilla package that's available. as part of this deployment. The next step allows me to select and accept the end-user license agreements for all the different content types that are being deployed. So yes, I want to accept this, and I want to accept this. This is going to give me a complete list of all the different end-user license agreements for all the different packages that are included in this deployment. Now I can set a name for this remediation. I'll just call this vulnerability remediation. It's already given a date tag here. And it's currently scheduled at essentially for an immediate start time. But I could also schedule this deployment for a later date or schedule for a recurring deployment if this was more of a task that I was deploying. Since these are vulnerabilities, of course, this is going to be a one-time remediation. I can also stage these deployments to say how many nodes I want to impact at the same time. If this is going out to a much larger group of endpoints in your environment, you may want to set this to only deploy to a certain number of nodes at the same time, so you can start to throttle some of the deployment out to your impacted endpoints. This also gives some basic options around suspending the deployment or to deploy that package even if the computer has been previously patched. The next stage of the deployment wizard shows me all the different package deployment options as well as the deployment order. This is giving me a complete view of all the different packages that are in this deployment. You can see here that I have a chain deployment of all these different endpoints for all these different vulnerabilities on these endpoints. Now the benefit here is that although I've got a mix of both Firefox and Windows content that are being updated, I'm actually going to be able to chain the reboot on all of those affected packages, so I only have one reboot per endpoint. On this list here, the 2 Adobe patches that I've scheduled for release don't require a reboot. You can see that here. And so those are not included in the chain. This portion of the deployment wizard also gives me the option to set some of the deployment options themselves. So by clicking on this icon over here, it's going to take me to a new page that gives me the ability to set some of these deployment options. In this case, I could suppress the chain reboot, but I want to be able to chain those as part of the overall deployment. Or I could set some additional flags for any of the other specific types of deployments that you wanted to do here. So in this stage of the deployment wizard, we can set the endpoint notifications. Now I have 2 different types of notifications that I can send down to the endpoint. One is a notification that the deployment is about to begin, and I can either elect to let my end users know that a deployment is about to begin, and then the second notification is to notify users of a reboot. Now in this case, the default options are to not notify users and to notify users of the reboot. So the first step here is to decide whether or not you want to notify the users that a deployment is about to begin. Now, if you decide to notify those users, there are some additional options we provide in order to set those notifications by policy, or you can also set some of those notifications to allow the user to snooze that deployment or to cancel the deployment entirely. In this case, though, we don't want to notify the users that the deployment's about to begin, but we will want to notify the user of a pending reboot. In this case, we can elect to have that end user know that a reboot is required in order to fully patch that machine. The last stage of the deployment wizard is just as a review to verify those deployment options and as part of this one summary screen. So I can see that I've got my job name, I've got it when it's going to be scheduled. It's a one-time deployment. And I can see that it's including these selected packages. So at this point, I can finish the deployment, and it's going to send the deployment out to those impacted endpoints. Now in this final summary screen, I've started my deployment, and I'm now going to cache all the required content in order for me to be able to send those packages out to the impacted endpoints. Okay, so we've done our deployment now, and the last stage of your 5-step patch and remediation process is to now report on the status of your deployments. So in a heterogeneous network environment, it's almost impossible to obtain consolidated reports that provide a comprehensive view of the organization's risk and patch status. Lumension Patch and Remediation provides comprehensive reporting across all major platforms, Windows, Linux, Unix, and Mac, and applications, Adobe, WinZip, Real Networks, for your operational, management, and compliance initiatives, to give you an overall holistic view of your environmental risk through a consolidated management console. Okay, so from within the console itself, I'm going to select the Reports tab, and this gives me the option to view all the different reports that are available within the product. Now, this product's configured with additional modules beyond patch and remediation, so I'm seeing the option for some antivirus reports or some device control reports. But in this case, I want to look specifically at the vulnerabilities reports. This gives me a list of all the different included reports as part of patch and remediation. But within patch and remediation, we also have some additional Lumension reporting services reports that are available for download. So I want to take a look at some of these specific reports here. These are some specific vulnerability compliance reports that we make available through Lumension reporting services. So these are reports that directly query your patch and remediation database to give you a more comprehensive view of the remediation status of those vulnerabilities on your endpoints. A couple I want to look at specifically are Patch Tuesday dashboard that we have created. So this gives a look at all the specific Patch Tuesday content from selected months. In this case, I'm only looking at enabled content for December, but I could also take a look back for previous Patch Tuesday months. This gives me a comprehensive look at all the different vulnerabilities that were released by Microsoft as part of the December Patch Tuesday, and then gives me an overall view of which of those endpoints as part of this group are applicable to this content and are currently not patched for this content. So this gives me a quick view of the patch status of all of my Patch Tuesday content released from December. Also, I could take a look at a different Patch Tuesday status by endpoint. So this is giving me a look at, again, this vulnerability management group, this custom group that we've looked at before, and it's looking at all the specific Patch Tuesday content that is currently applicable to this machine. I can now drill in to look at these other machines as well. And so now I see what specific Patch Tuesday bulletins are not patched for this XP machine and which Patch Tuesday bulletins are not patched for this Windows 7 machine. A lot of times we also find that our customers use the individual views within the product itself as a reporting mechanism. So I can also look at individual vulnerabilities to get a complete vulnerability list, and I'm able to export that list for review later. I could also take a look at, from managing my groups, I could take a look at the vulnerabilities that are applicable to this group, and then export this list as well as another option for reporting on the patch status of the vulnerabilities for that group. Okay, so we've shown the 5 different steps of an effective patch and remediation process, but now I want to take a little bit of time to talk about some additional capabilities that are in the patch and remediation module as part of the Lumension Endpoint Management and Security Suite. So first off, we're going to look at the Security Configuration Management option. This SCM component as part of patch and remediation provides management of security configuration baselines for workstations, servers, and mobile laptops from a single point of control. This allows you to deliver continuous and proactive assessment to prevent configuration drift and ensure policy compliance. Out of the box, we include regulatory and industry standards-based configuration templates for identification of configuration-based risk through monitoring and reporting on systems that are non-compliant. Security Configuration Management from Lumension delivers an SCAP-validated FDCC scanner and a NIST-validated solution. So within the product, I can see my Security Configuration Management assessment results from the Manage Groups page. I'm going to select Groups from the Manage dropdown. And now when I've selected the group that I want to report off of, I can select from the View dropdown either the compliance detail or the compliance summary results. So first I want to look at a compliance summary. This is going to give me a summarized view of all the different assessments that have been run on these endpoints that are included in this group. So this gives me a look at all the different endpoints that have been reported or have not been assessed or either are not applicable. This also gives me an overall view of the compliance status of those endpoints. Down below here, I have the ability to see exactly which FDCC requirements or NIST profiles are being scanned for these endpoints. This gives me a list of the different benchmarks that are being scanned in my environment. And I can also drill into each of these to see for this specific baseline which of the machines are compliant or non-compliant. This also gives me a view of specific custom content that's been scanned on these endpoints. If I select the compliance detail summary, I can also look at the specific assessments that have been run for each machine. If I look at this Windows 7 machine here, I can tell that I've run this USGCB for Internet Explorer 8. I can now drill into this as well to see specific results for that endpoint. This takes me to the Security Configuration tab for this specific endpoint, where I can now drill into these benchmark results and I can see specifically which configurations have passed or not passed. And also, by looking at these benchmarks, I have the ability to export the results of those to prove compliance for those endpoints. Another add-on that we have as part of patch and remediation is the Lumension Content Wizard. The Lumension Content Wizard, or LCW, simplifies the creation and management of custom software patches, scripts, and desktop configurations to improve IT efficiencies and your overall security posture. The LCW extends the capabilities of Lumension patch and remediation and automates tedious and time-consuming system and desktop management tasks. With the LCW, you have the option to create and centrally manage your power management policies as well to reduce your IT power consumption. In this case, for this demonstration, I'd like to create an uninstall patch for maybe some non-business applications that you have in your environment. So I'm going to start the uninstall wizard to create a new patch. This first wizard screen is going to allow me to select whether that target endpoint for this targeted non-business application is on this local machine or on a remote machine. In this case, I'm actually going to search for applications that are on this local machine. The next step in the wizard brings up a list of all the different applications that are currently installed on this machine. In this case, I see that I've got Party Poker on this endpoint, so I want to remove that. I now have the ability to customize the name of this removal patch. So I've pre-configured a name to call it Uninstall Party Poker. That sounds pretty good. And now I'm going to finish and create this patch. From within the LCW itself, I now have the pre-configured signatures and deployment packages to uninstall Party Poker. Now I've automatically configured this patch so that I can detect for a registry setting for whether or not Party Poker is installed. And then I've got my removal script to actually remove Party Poker from that endpoint. You can also see from within this patch that I've got an uninstall for Party Poker, both an x86 and a 64-bit version. And from within this patch, you can see that here are all the different OSs that are targeted. I'm making an assumption that this application is only going to run on Windows machines because it was found on a Windows target machine. And then you can see that I've pre-selected all the different editions that are supported on these different Windows platforms. Within the LCW, I also have the ability to customize the title of that patch. When it was released, I can set the vendor for that patch, and then I can set the impact. In this case, I want it to show up as a software patch, and then I can set it as active if I'd like. I can change the description. And then save this patch. So now we've viewed all the different ways that we can manage endpoints using patch and remediation, and we've taken a look at some of the additional add-ons that are part of patch and remediation. In summary, with the Lumension Endpoint Management and Security Suite, with the integrated patch and remediation capabilities, organizations are now able to stay ahead of all those remote threats, to streamline security and operational management across their heterogeneous environments, to gain visibility into real-time patch status and overall security posture, to save time and cost through automation, and to elevate their security posture with full visibility into and control over those endpoints. The Patch and Remediation module as part of the Lumension Endpoint Management and Security Suite reduces overall complexity, optimizes your total cost of ownership, improves visibility, and delivers control back to your IT administrators. I hope you found this demonstration video of Lumension Patch and Remediation interesting and useful. You'll find more in-depth information on specific capabilities in the video vignettes in the Vulnerability Management Demo Center. You'll also find other demo and detail videos which cover additional LEMSS modules in this demo center. Finally, if you'd like to get hands-on with the Lumension Patch and Remediation module, please click on the Get Your Free Trial link, where you can access a virtual online evaluation version of the module and run the same tools I just demonstrated for you. You'll find some useful evaluation guides in the virtual environment, and of course, our sales engineering staff is always ready to help answer any questions you might have. Thank you for your interest.